Number indicates whether one or more persons or things are involved in performing the action of a verb. We use categories like singular when referring to one thing and plural when referring to more than one. In modern English, the verb agrees in number and person with its subject. So in a sentence like, "They is learning to preach," you'd recognize that the singular verb is doesn't agree with the number of its plural subject, they. According to the rules of English grammar, it should be, "They are learning to preach." Verbs inflect, that is, they change form in order to agree with their subject. Notice in the next example where our present tense verb should inflect based on grammatical person, that is first, second, third person, and in number, singular and plural. I learn. We learn. You learn. You learn. He learn. They learn. One of those probably sounded a little off, right? The third person singular, he learn, should be he learns. The addition of the s at the end of the word is an example of how a verb inflects to agree with its subject. Okay, so in order to see the nouns and pronouns that are singular and plural, along with the verbs, we want to set up a visual filter. Went up to File, and then Visual Filter. Make sure that you have Morph selected here, and let's name this, abbreviate it, Singular and Plural, VF, and for Visual Filter. And let's keep the range all passages, the resource ESV, and the morphology Logos Greek morphology. And now what we want to do is type in an @ symbol, and we want to find nouns that are singular in number, and let's make those, choose color green for the letters, and let's get pronouns in there as well that are singular in number. And now let's make those the same color of letters. And now let's look at the verbs, and let's choose singular. Let's make those a block colored green. And now let's do the same thing but with plural. So noun, plural. In this case, let's make them orange letters. And we'll do the same thing for pronouns. Plural and pick orange. And then finally, we'll get the verbs that are plural in number. And select orange, solid color. Okay, so this is going to be pretty busy once we pull up the ESV, but it will allow us to see which words are singular and plural without us jumping back and forth between the reverse and linear line. Often, the subject and verb agree in number. So an author or speaker may use a singular subject with a singular verb, and they may use a plural subject with a plural verb. Here in Matthew 15:29, we have an example of a singular subject used with a singular verb. Here in this verse, Jesus is the subject who performs the action of this verb here, went, and this verb over here. And the color of the visual filter shows you that these two, or actually these three words, are in agreement as far as grammatical number. Just keep in mind that these words here are being highlighted based on the Greek morphology, not on the English morphology. So in other words, Jesus here is highlighted in green letters because the morphology below Jesus, which is translated Jesus, is singular in grammatical number here. Same thing with the word which is translated went, metabos, is also singular in number, as well as the other verb over here, elthen, which is translated walked. That too is singular in grammatical number. Let's now look at an example with a plural subject and a plural verb. Let's go to Matthew 15:12. Here in this verse, Matthew 15:12, the orange highlighting and the agreement in color indicates that the underlying Greek words for these English words are plural in grammatical number. Seems pretty straightforward, right? Plural subject and a verb that matches. But next we'll look at some places where it's not so straightforward. Now in Mark 14:16 we have an example of nouns and pronouns in the plural matching in agreement with verbs that are plural in number. So once again, the words that are highlighted here, they're highlighted in terms of the Greek morphology, not the English morphology. We don't have anything tagged in terms of English morphology. So this word here, disciples, in the underlying Greek we have hoi mathetai, and this is nominative, plural, masculine. And then we have this verb here, set, exelthon, or set out, exelthon, in the plural matching as well, along with went and found. All of these are colored orange, along with prepared. We do have one verb colored green, that's because it refers back to Jesus. That pronoun refers to him. So still pretty straightforward. We have plural matching plural. But even when you're doing this or walking through a visual filter like this, you'll still want to take note of who's performing the action of the verb. And ask the question, in this context, is that significant? Alright, so now let's get into some of the exceptions. A neuter plural subject can be used with a singular verb. According to Greek grammarians, the neuter plural normally takes a verb singular in number. But the singular verb also regards the plural subject as a collective whole. This idea of the collective whole is an insight from Greek grammarian Daniel Wallace. And that's what we have here in Luke chapter 4, verse 41, which reads, "And demons also came out of many, crying, 'You are the Son of God.' But he rebuked them and would not allow them to speak because they knew that he was the Christ." So visually you can see that this word here, demons, which is translated from the Greek daimonia, is in the neuter, grammatically neuter, and the word here, came, is singular in grammatical number, which is translated from this Greek word exerkata. So if we apply this information back to this occurrence here in this verse, we can see that the demons came out collectively. Okay, so in Ephesians 4:17, we have another example or illustration of a neuter plural noun used with a verb that is singular in number. Now remember, I'm pointing these things out because as you work with more tools, morphology, and as you get into using the reverse interlinear pane on a regular basis, you may find some things that strike you as strange or odd, given our own English backgrounds. But I'm going through this just so that you can account for the mismatch between words, as we have here in this verse. You'll notice, because of the highlighting, this word Gentiles, which in the Greek is ethne, and it's nominative plural neuter, and the verb next to it isn't highlighted orange to match it in grammatical number. Instead, it's plural. And that's the Greek word, peripate, which, if we look down here at the morphology, is present active indicative third person singular, not plural. So just by review, remember the neuter plural does take a verb that is singular in number. But that verb that is singular in number regards its subject as a collective whole. And so Paul here is making a comment about the actions of Gentiles collectively, that the believers in Ephesus should no longer live as they do. A neuter plural subject can be used with a plural verb. In this instance, the individuality of each subject in the neuter plural is stressed. And again, this is an insight from Daniel Wallace. And you may have noticed In the previous example, we've used this one before, Luke chapter 4, verse 41, and I showed you how there's a mismatch here. But in reading the verse, you may have noticed that while there was a switch here, demons and these two verbs used here actually match. So again, if we apply this information back to this particular verse and the occurrence of these words, we may be able to see that perhaps the demons collectively came out and then individually crying and individually knowing that he was the Christ. And while the insight as to how the neuter plural works with the different number, and while the neuter plural working with verbs that are grammatically singular and plural in number can maybe account as to the reason why these are different, you don't want to base a point in a sermon off of grammatical information like this, but it could at the same time possibly provide an explanation as to what's going on here. In John 10:27 we have another example of a neuter plural word matched with a verb that is plural in grammatical number. And as we looked at before, when we have such an agreement, the individuality of the subject is stressed. Or to put it the other way, this word is plural in the Greek. If this verb was green in color, signifying that it was singular, the sheep would hear the voice of the shepherd as a collective whole. Also, if this was green instead of orange, we would know that the sheep also follow the shepherd as a collective whole. But instead, these English verbs have been highlighted orange because the underlying Greek verbs are plural in grammatical number. And so what we have here is actually the individuality of the subject here, which is sheep. So the point here is this, that the sheep individually hear the voice of the shepherd, and they follow the shepherd. This is a comfort to believers who wonder if they've ever heard the voice of God, or how do they know they're following him? But here, the grammar is not stressing sheep as a collective whole. Instead, it's stressing individuality. John 4:35 through 36 is used all the time to describe the process and fruit of sharing the gospel. The verse reads like this in the ESV. Do you not say, there are yet 4 months, and then comes the harvest? Look, I tell you, lift up your eyes and see that the fields are white for harvest. Already the one who reaps is receiving wages and gathering fruit for eternal life, so that the sower and reaper may rejoice together. And there's something really interesting going on in this verse. Let's take a closer look at the morphology of the Greek word which is translated rejoice. In John 4:36, we have an example of that compound subject working with a verb that is grammatically singular in number. Verse 36 reads, Already the one who reaps is receiving wages and gathering fruit for eternal life, so that the sower and the reaper may rejoice together. Now it seems that this should be pretty straightforward because, well, we have the word highlighted here in green, as well as here and here. They should match. But actually what we have is a compound subject. Sower and reaper are joined by a conjunction, in Greek, kai. But now, John doesn't use a verb that is grammatically plural in number for this compound subject. Instead, he uses a verb that is grammatically singular in number in order to cast a spotlight on one of the subjects, and it's the one that comes first. Now in English, we don't want to look at word order there. We want to look at the manuscript line here in the reverse interlinear. These numbers indicate the order of the Greek words in the manuscript. And you can see from the word order here which subject out of the two has the spotlight. Here we have the sower, ha speron, numbers 40, 41, And now notice I need to jump over a few words here to hamu, which is together, 42, kaire, 43, may rejoice, and then ha, therizon, which is translated reaper, 45 and 46. Now if I were to read this back in English with the Greek word order, you could hear where the emphasis is. The sower may rejoice together, and the reaper. So can you hear the effect that the word order had? That's the type of thing that can't get communicated or actually gets lost in translation from Greek to English. Now how would you use this in a sermon? Well, this is a great point to make because oftentimes in ministry we only concentrate or celebrate on the people who get to reap the harvest or eat the fruit of ministry. And oftentimes we don't celebrate or rejoice with the one who sows and puts in the hard work and labor, the toil, so that the ministry can be fruitful.